I had always dreamed of living in a quiet suburban neighborhood. After 15 years of apartment living in the city, I finally had saved enough to purchase my little slice of the American dream. A modest three-bedroom house with a small yard and even a tool shed in the back. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Manicured lawns, friendly waves, a place where I could finally relax. The first month was everything I had hoped for. I introduced myself to neighbors, unpacked my belongings, and settled into a comfortable routine. I was particularly proud of my power efficiency. Having lived in small apartments most of my adult life, I was accustomed to minimizing electricity use. I unplugged devices when not in use. I installed LED bulbs throughout the house. I even timed my showers to conserve water and electricity. So you can imagine my surprise when my first full electricity bill arrived 2 months after moving in. It was more than double what I had budgeted based on the seller's previous usage. I checked and rechecked my calculations. Surely there must be some mistake, perhaps a billing error. Maybe the power company had misread the meter. I called the electric company the next morning. "I am sorry, sir, but the reading appears correct," the customer service representative said in a monotone voice that suggested he had heard this complaint hundreds of times before. "But that cannot be right," I insisted. "I live alone. I am extremely conservative with my electricity usage. There is no way I could possibly be using this much power." "Perhaps you left something running, or maybe your water heater is malfunctioning." I knew I had done no such thing. I could account for every appliance, every light bulb, every plug in the house. "We can send someone out to check your meter if you would like," he offered, "but there will be a service charge if we find nothing wrong." I reluctantly agreed, not wanting to incur additional charges but determined to find the source of the problem. The technician arrived 2 days later, examined the meter, and declared it functioning properly. "Everything looks normal to me," he said with a shrug. "Sometimes these older homes are not as energy efficient as you might think." But I was not convinced, and as the days passed, I began noticing other irregularities. The lights would flicker, especially in the evening hours. Brief power outages lasting mere seconds. The kind most people might attribute to the grid adjusting or a squirrel on a power line somewhere. But they happened too frequently to be coincidental. And then there was the woman across the street. Karen, as the neighbors called her. Mid-50s, immaculately maintained blonde hair, always dressed as though heading to a country club luncheon even when retrieving her mail. I noticed her watching me. Every time I left the house, I would feel her eyes following me. She would be watering her prized roses or adjusting her wind chimes, but her gaze would fix on me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. One evening, as I returned home from work, she called out to me. "Your lights are always on," she said, her voice carrying a strange, accusatory tone, "even when you are not home." "I am sorry. Your electricity bill must be through the roof," she continued, a thin smile spreading across her face. "Terrible for the environment, too." I stood there, keys in hand, bewildered by the comment. "Actually, I am very careful about turning lights off. I just got a bill that seems too high." She hummed, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Maybe you should check your wiring. Old houses, you know, they can be so unpredictable." That night I lay awake thinking about Karen's strange comments, and then something caught my attention. A soft glow coming through my bedroom window. I got up and looked out. My tool shed at the back of the property had lights on, lights that I distinctly remembered turning off before going to bed. I threw on a robe and slippers and hurried outside. By the time I reached the shed, the lights were off again. I stood in the dark, confused and increasingly suspicious. Why would my shed lights turn on by themselves? And why had my power bill doubled when I lived alone and barely used any electricity? The next morning, I saw Karen standing in her driveway, coffee cup in hand, watching my house again. This time, when our eyes met, she did not look away. She smiled and raised her cup as if toasting me. A chill ran down my spine. Something was not right here, and I was going to find out what it was. I am an engineer by profession. I solve problems methodically, gathering data before reaching conclusions. So I approached my mysterious power situation the same way I would tackle any engineering challenge, with careful observation and measurement. First, I needed to establish a baseline. I purchased a smart electricity usage monitor that could track consumption by the hour. Installation was simple, a small device that connected to my breaker panel and transmitted data to my phone. Within days, patterns emerged that confirmed my suspicions. The monitor showed significant power spikes between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., when I was typically asleep. Additional draws occurred during midday when I was at work. The usage pattern made no sense for a single person who was either sleeping or absent during these peak times. I began keeping a journal, noting the exact times of power fluctuations and cross-referencing them with activities in the neighborhood. After a week of careful documentation, I noticed something peculiar. The largest power draws coincided precisely with when Karen's outdoor lights and garden features turned on. One Tuesday evening, I positioned myself by my bedroom window with a clear view of both my property and hers. At exactly 11:23 p.m., my lights dimmed momentarily, and within seconds, Karen's garage lights illuminated, followed by her decorative garden path lighting. This happened again at 1:17 a.m. and then again at 5:46 a.m. before sunrise. This could not be coincidence. The correlation was too perfect, too predictable. The next day, I took the afternoon off work and conducted a thorough inspection of my property. I started at the main electrical box and traced the wiring along the side of my house. Everything appeared normal until I reached the back fence that separated our yards. There, partially hidden beneath overgrown ivy and garden debris, I found it, a small cable running from my external conduit along the fence line toward Karen's property. My heart raced as I carefully brushed away the leaves concealing the wire. It was skillfully installed, clearly the work of someone with electrical knowledge. I retrieved my voltmeter from the garage and tested the line. The reading confirmed current was flowing through the wire, my current powering her home. I followed the cable as far as I could without trespassing onto her property. It disappeared beneath the fence and resurfaced briefly before vanishing into her gardening shed, which sat suspiciously close to the property line. This was it. This was how she was stealing my electricity. Armed with evidence, I decided to confront her directly. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation. Perhaps the previous owners had some arrangement I was unaware of. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt before escalating further. I walked across the street and knocked on her door. Karen answered wearing gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed hat, as though I had interrupted some important horticultural pursuit. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. "I need to speak with you about something important. It appears there is an unauthorized electrical connection running from my house to your property." Her expression changed instantly, her friendly neighbor facade cracking ever so slightly before being carefully repositioned. "I have no idea what you are talking about," she replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "Why would I need to steal electricity? That is absurd." "I have discovered a wire running from my electrical box to your shed," I continued, holding up my phone to show her the photographs I had taken. "My usage monitor shows power being drawn at specific times that coincide exactly with when your outdoor features turn on." "Those are serious accusations," she said, her voice hardening. "Perhaps you should check your facts before throwing around such ridiculous claims. I have lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. You have been here, what, a few months? No one will believe you." "The evidence is quite clear," I persisted. "I am asking you to disconnect the line immediately, or I will need to involve the authorities." Karen laughed then, a sharp, dismissive sound that carried across the pristine front yard. "Go ahead," she challenged. "Call whoever you want. Do you really think they will take the word of a newcomer over a respected member of the community? I am on the HOA board, for goodness sake. You are clearly unstable if you think I would do something like that." With that, she closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, stunned by her brazen denial and implicit threat. She was right about one thing. Her position in the neighborhood gave her credibility I did not yet have. Walking back to my house, I realized I needed more than just my observations and voltage readings. I needed undeniable proof that even the HOA could not ignore. That was when I decided to set a trap, one that would expose her theft in the most public way possible. Despite Karen's dismissal, I believed that with proper evidence, the homeowners association would have to take my complaint seriously. I spent the next week meticulously preparing my case. I compiled spreadsheets showing the correlation between my power fluctuations and her outdoor lighting schedule. I printed photographs of the unauthorized cable. I even created a detailed diagram showing exactly how she had tapped into my electrical system. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening at the community center. I arrived early, materials in hand, prepared to present my findings during the open forum portion of the meeting. I noticed Karen already seated at the front table beside the president, engaged in friendly conversation. I should have recognized the warning signs right then. When my turn came to speak, I approached the podium confidently. "Good evening. I am here to report a serious issue affecting my property at 147 Maple Street. I have discovered that my neighbor has illegally connected to my electrical system and has been stealing power from my home for several months." Before I could continue, the HOA president, a tall man named Richard with a permanent expression of mild irritation, interrupted me. "That is a very serious accusation, mister." He paused, pretending to search for my name despite the fact that I had signed in upon arrival. "Anderson, James Anderson," I supplied. "Yes, Mr. Anderson. Do you have any actual proof of this alleged theft?" I began distributing my carefully prepared documents to the board members. As you can see from these usage reports, there are consistent power spikes during times when I am not home. I have traced the source to this unauthorized connection, I said, pointing to the photographs. This cable runs directly from my junction box to the property of Karen Williams at 150 Maple Street. Karen gasped theatrically, her hand flying to her chest. "This is outrageous. I have never heard such nonsense in all my years in this neighborhood." Richard raised his hand to quiet her, though the gesture seemed performative rather than genuine. "Mr. Anderson, we appreciate you bringing your concerns to the board. However, these documents do not constitute proof of theft. Power fluctuations could be caused by any number of factors. And this cable," he pointed dismissively at my photographs, "could be anything. Without an official inspection from the power company or a licensed electrician, we cannot take action based solely on your suspicions." "But I am a licensed electrical engineer," I protested. "This is clearly an unauthorized connection drawing power from my system." "Nevertheless," Richard continued, "the HOA cannot intervene in what appears to be a personal dispute between neighbors. I suggest you work this out privately or contact the appropriate authorities if you believe a crime has been committed." Karen sat silently, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Furthermore," Richard added, "I must remind all residents that unfounded accusations against neighbors constitute a violation of our Community Harmony Clause. Such behavior could result in formal citation." I stood there dumbfounded. The Community Harmony Clause? They were threatening to cite me for reporting theft. It was then that I noticed the knowing glances exchanged between Karen and several board members. This was not a neutral forum, it was her territory. I gathered my documents and returned to my seat, seething with anger and frustration. The meeting continued around me, but I barely heard the discussions about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. All I could focus on was the realization that I would receive no help from this quarter. The following morning, I found a flyer in my mailbox. It was a community alert about a disturbed individual making false accusations against respected community members. While it did not name me specifically, the implication was clear. Similar notices appeared on the community bulletin board and in email communications to all residents. Within days, the neighborhood atmosphere changed dramatically. People who had previously greeted me warmly now averted their eyes when I passed. One woman actually crossed the street to avoid walking past my house. I overheard snippets of conversation at the local coffee shop. Mental issues, paranoid, troublemaker. Karen had executed a masterful preemptive strike. By controlling the narrative, she had effectively isolated me. Any further complaints I might make would now be viewed through the lens of her carefully constructed portrayal of me as unstable and vindictive. I realized I had badly underestimated my opponent. This was not just about electricity theft anymore, it had become psychological warfare. And I was losing badly. But engineers are problem solvers by nature. If the system was rigged against me, I would simply have to create a new system, one that would expose her theft so dramatically that even her HOA cronies could not ignore it. I needed a plan that would force the truth into the open. A plan that would make her theft so publicly obvious that no amount of gaslighting or community influence could cover it up. It was time to fight fire with fire, or in this case, electricity with electricity. The solution came to me during a restless night. If Karen wanted to steal my electricity, I would give her exactly what she wanted, along with something she definitely did not want. I would create a system that would not only detect her unauthorized power usage, but would announce it to the entire neighborhood in a way that could not be denied or explained away. My plan had to be carefully designed to meet several critical requirements. First, it needed to be completely legal. I could not risk breaking any laws, as that would undermine my position and potentially expose me to liability. Second, it needed to be safe. Despite my anger, I had no desire to cause anyone physical harm. And third, it needed to be undeniable, evidence so clear and public that even Karen's HOA allies could not dismiss it. I began by researching home security systems and electrical modifications that would serve my purpose. I found that while tampering with utility equipment was illegal, modifying my own home wiring after the meter was perfectly within my rights as a homeowner, particularly when done to protect my property from theft. I drafted detailed plans for a modified circuit that would trigger when unauthorized power draw was detected. The system would function similarly to a standard security system, but would be activated specifically by electrical theft rather than physical intrusion. When triggered, it would set off a series of high-decibel sirens and powerful strobe lights positioned strategically around my property. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered the necessary components. I was careful to make my purchases at different hardware stores throughout the region, paying in cash to avoid creating an electronic trail that might later be used against me. I bought marine-grade sirens, weather-resistant strobe lights, motion sensors, voltage monitors, and various electrical components needed for the installation. I converted my garage into a temporary workshop, setting up benches where I could test the system components without risk of detection. I worked late into the night, after my day job, carefully assembling and programming the various elements of my trap. The core of the system was a custom circuit board I designed myself, which would monitor current flow and activate the alarm system when it detected the specific pattern of draw that characterized Karen's theft. The installation had to be done carefully and incrementally to avoid arousing suspicion. I began by upgrading my external junction box, ostensibly as part of a general home improvement project. I installed the sensors and monitoring equipment, concealing them within standard electrical fixtures so they would not attract attention. Next came the sirens and lights, which I mounted under the eaves of my roof and along the fence line, disguised as ordinary security lights. Anyone glancing at them would see what appeared to be standard motion-activated floodlights, not the high-powered strobes and sirens they actually contained. The most delicate part of the installation was the trigger mechanism connected to the illicit line that fed Karen's property. I needed to modify that connection without alerting her to the changes. One Saturday morning, when I knew she was at her weekly yoga class, I carefully exposed the hidden cable and spliced in my detection circuit. This would allow the system to identify when power was being drawn through that specific line, triggering the alarm only when the theft was actively occurring. After each component was installed, I conducted careful tests to ensure everything functioned correctly. I simulated power draws, checking that the system could distinguish between normal usage fluctuations and the specific pattern that would indicate Karen was tapping into my electricity. I adjusted sensitivity levels to prevent false alarms, ensuring the system would activate only when I was absolutely certain of theft. The final step was to install a master control panel in my bedroom, allowing me to arm or disarm the system as needed. I also added a backup battery system to ensure that even if Karen somehow managed to cut power to my house entirely, the trap would still function. By the end of the third week, everything was in place. I had created a comprehensive system that would detect, record, and announce her theft in spectacular fashion. The motion sensors were calibrated. The sirens were tested at low volume to confirm function without alerting the neighborhood prematurely. The strobe lights were positioned for maximum visibility. I armed the system that Friday evening, prepared for what might be a long wait. But I had studied Karen's patterns carefully. Friday nights were when she typically hosted her weekly wine gatherings, events that coincided with some of the largest power draws I had recorded. The additional lighting, music systems, and climate control she used for these soirees demanded significant electricity. My electricity. As I sat in my darkened living room that night, watching her home fill with guests, I felt a strange calm. After weeks of frustration and isolation, I was finally taking back control. The trap was set. All that remained was for Karen to spring it herself. Friday night passed without incident, as did Saturday. By Sunday evening, I was beginning to wonder if Karen had somehow discovered my modifications and abandoned her illicit power tap. Perhaps she had decided the risk was no longer worth the reward. But then I reminded myself of her arrogance, her absolute confidence that she was untouchable in this neighborhood. No, she would continue. It was just a matter of time. That time came at precisely 1:47 a.m. on Monday morning. I was in a light sleep when the familiar flicker of my bedroom light signaled a power draw. But this time, instead of silence, the night erupted into magnificent chaos. The sirens screamed to life, their wail piercing the quiet suburban night with an intensity that made my windows vibrate. Simultaneously, brilliant strobes began flashing, bathing the entire property in pulsating red and blue light that mimicked emergency vehicles. The effect was exactly as I had planned, impossible to ignore, impossible to silence, and impossible to explain away. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the window. The entire street was lighting up as if caught in a lightning storm. Within seconds, lights came on in houses up and down the block. Neighbors stumbled out onto their lawns in various states of undress, confused and alarmed by the commotion. And then Karen appeared. She burst through her front door wearing silk pajamas and a facial mask, her hair in curlers. Her expression was a magnificent combination of rage, confusion, and dawning horror as she realized what was happening. I calmly put on my robe and slippers and walked outside, voltmeter in hand. By now, a small crowd had gathered in the street between our homes, some recording the scene on their phones. "What is the meaning of this?" Karen shrieked, her voice nearly lost in the wail of the sirens. "Turn those off immediately." I approached the group of neighbors, my voice pitched to carry over the noise. "I apologize for the disturbance, everyone. I installed this alarm system after discovering that someone has been stealing electricity from my home for months." "This is ridiculous," Karen shouted. "He is clearly unstable. Someone call the police." "I already have," I replied calmly. "In fact, I would appreciate if everyone stayed until they arrive. There is something I need to show you all." With the neighbors following, I walked to the side of my property where the hidden cable ran. The strobes illuminated the area perfectly, making the wire clearly visible even in the darkness. "This cable," I explained, pointing to the line that emerged from my junction box, "was installed without my knowledge or consent. It runs directly to Karen's property and has been siphoning electricity from my home since before I moved in." "That is absurd," Karen protested, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. Several neighbors were now filming the exposed cable, murmuring among themselves. "If it is not drawing power, then you will not mind if I demonstrate," I said, holding up my voltmeter. With deliberate movements, I attached the leads to the exposed wire. The display immediately registered current flow. "As you can see," I continued, "electricity is flowing through this unauthorized connection right now. It leads directly to Karen's garden shed and from there to her home." "I have never seen that wire before in my life," Karen insisted, but the doubt was evident in her neighbor's expressions now. Then you will not mind if we follow it to see where it leads, I suggested, gesturing toward her property. You cannot go onto my property, she snapped. That is trespassing. One of the neighbors, an older gentleman I recognized as a retired judge, stepped forward. Karen, if what he is showing us is true, then you have been committing theft. Given the circumstances, I think allowing us to verify where this wire leads is the least you can do. Karen looked around frantically, suddenly realizing she was losing control of the situation. The neighborhood that had once been firmly under her influence was turning against her. The evidence was literally flashing before their eyes. The wail of approaching police sirens joined my alarm system, creating a cacophony that seemed to symbolize the collapse of Karen's carefully constructed facade. As the patrol car pulled up, I finally silenced my alarm system with the remote control I had kept in my pocket. In the sudden quiet, the reality of the situation settled over the assembled crowd. The officers approached, looking confused at the gathering. "Someone want to tell me what is going on here?" the first officer asked. Before Karen could speak, several neighbors began talking at once, pointing to the exposed wire and the readings on my voltmeter. The officer held up his hand for silence and turned to me. "Sir, can you explain what this is all about?" I took a deep breath and began recounting the entire story, from the suspicious power bills to my discovery of the illicit connection, the HOA's dismissal of my concerns, and finally my solution to expose the theft. As I spoke, I could see Karen's expression shifting from indignation to panic to resignation. The truth, so long denied, was finally illuminated for all to see, as bright and undeniable as the strobes that had announced it to the neighborhood. By sunrise, the initial chaos had evolved into a structured investigation. The police officers had taken statements from me and several witnesses, photographed the unauthorized connection, and issued Karen a citation for theft of utilities. A misdemeanor in our state, but one that could potentially lead to more serious charges once the full extent of the theft was determined. What I had not anticipated was how quickly the story would spread beyond our neighborhood. One of the younger residents had live-streamed portions of the night's events on social media. By morning, local news vans were parked along our street, reporters eager for interviews about what they were calling the suburban power heist. I declined most interview requests, preferring to let the legal process unfold without media interference. Karen, however, was not so restrained. In a misguided attempt to salvage her reputation, she gave an impromptu press conference from her driveway, claiming she was the victim of a vindictive neighbor's elaborate hoax. "I have been a respected member of this community for 20 years, she told the cameras, her voice quavering with practiced emotion. "This man has been harassing me since he moved in. These accusations are completely false, and I intend to file charges for defamation and criminal harassment." Her performance might have been convincing if not for the damning physical evidence that continued to exist between our properties. When reporters asked about the wire connection, she claimed it must have been installed by the previous owner of my home, or perhaps by me as part of my campaign to destroy her reputation. 2 days after the incident, I received a call from the police department. They requested my presence at the station to discuss the investigation. When I arrived, I was surprised to find representatives from the power company also in attendance. "Mr. Anderson," the detective began, "we have completed our preliminary investigation of the power theft from your residence. The utility company has conducted their own analysis based on meter readings and physical evidence." The utility representative, a serious woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun, opened a folder containing several graphs and charts. "Based on our assessment, we estimate the unauthorized connection has been in place for approximately 4 years, she explained. "The previous owner of your home may have been unaware of the theft or possibly complicit. We are still investigating that angle." "And the amount of electricity stolen?" I asked. "Our conservative estimate puts the value at just over $14,000 over the 4-year period, she replied. This includes the electricity itself plus penalties and interest. I was stunned by the figure. This was not merely occasional borrowing of power for outdoor lights. This was systematic, deliberate theft on a significant scale. "We will be filing formal charges," the detective informed me. "The district attorney believes there is more than sufficient evidence for a criminal case. In addition, the utility company will be seeking restitution for the stolen electricity." Later that week, I received another unexpected call, this one from Richard, the HOA president. "James," he began, his tone notably more respectful than during our previous interaction, "the board would like to schedule an emergency meeting to discuss recent events in the neighborhood. We would appreciate your attendance." The meeting was held the following evening. The community room was packed, with residents standing along the walls after all seats were filled. Richard called the meeting to order with obvious discomfort. "In light of recent events involving electrical theft in our community," he began, carefully avoiding names, "the board feels it necessary to address certain procedural failures in how complaints are handled. We recognize that a resident's legitimate concerns were inadequately addressed." This statement, clearly crafted by the HOA's attorney who sat nearby taking notes, was as close to an apology as I was likely to receive. Richard continued with a series of proposed changes to the HOA complaint process, including requirements for independent investigation of all property-related allegations. When he finished, an older woman in the back stood up. "I move that we also discuss the removal of certain board members who failed to act impartially in this matter," she said firmly. "Specifically, I believe Karen Williams should be removed from all advisory positions given her involvement in the theft and subsequent attempt to discredit a fellow resident." A chorus of agreement rippled through the room. Richard looked as though he had swallowed something unpleasant, but nodded his acknowledgement of the motion. The vote that followed was nearly unanimous. Karen was removed from her positions on the Architectural Review Committee and the Neighborhood Watch program. Though she was not present at the meeting, news of the vote reached her quickly. The next morning, I noticed her collecting her mail as I left for work. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away and hurried back inside. The neighborhood had rendered its verdict, and it was far more devastating to her than any legal penalty would be. Her social standing, the currency she valued above all else, had been irrevocably diminished. In a community where reputation was everything, Karen had lost everything that mattered to her. Over the following weeks, I dismantled my elaborate alarm system, returning my home's electrical setup to normal, with one important addition. I installed a comprehensive security system with cameras monitoring every corner of my property. No one would ever steal from me again without being recorded in high definition. The legal proceedings against Karen moved forward methodically. She eventually accepted a plea agreement that required full restitution to both me and the utility company, plus community service hours. The criminal charge would remain on her record, a permanent reminder of her actions. As spring turned to summer, I noticed a distinct change in the neighborhood atmosphere. People who had once avoided me now stopped to chat when I collected my mail or worked in the yard. Several neighbors invited me to cookouts or community events. One evening, the retired judge who had spoken up during the night of the alarm brought over a bottle of whiskey, and we sat on my porch discussing everything from local politics to classical literature. "You know," he said as the evening grew late, "this neighborhood used to be different. Before Karen and her crowd took over the HOA, people actually helped each other, looked out for one another. I think we might be getting back to that." The HOA itself underwent significant changes. Richard resigned as president shortly after the emergency meeting, citing personal reasons that everyone understood to mean he could not weather the association with Karen's scandal. New leadership was elected, including several long-standing residents who had previously avoided HOA politics due to the toxic environment. One of their first official acts was to issue a formal written apology for the board's failure to properly investigate my initial complaints. While largely symbolic, the gesture represented a meaningful shift in community governance. Karen herself became increasingly reclusive. The vibrant social gatherings that once filled her home every weekend ceased entirely. Her meticulously maintained lawn began to show signs of neglect. Occasionally, I would glimpse her through a window or catch sight of her hurrying to her car, head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone she passed. Then on a warm Tuesday in July, a for sale sign appeared in her front yard. The listing price was well below market value, a clear indication of her desire for a quick sale. But weeks passed with no takers. Word of the electricity theft had spread through real estate circles, creating an unofficial black mark on the property that no discount could fully erase. Ironically, the power company used my case to launch a community awareness campaign about utility theft. They even created a case study based on my experience, though they changed the names and specific details. I received a letter thanking me for bringing the theft to light and informing me that they would be crediting my account for 1 year of service as a gesture of appreciation. With that credit and the court-ordered restitution from Karen, I decided to invest in a small solar panel system for my roof. The installation was completed by late summer, reducing my dependence on the grid and providing a satisfying sense of energy independence. I even added a battery backup system, ensuring that I would have power regardless of external circumstances. One evening in early fall, I sat on my back patio enjoying the mild weather and the soft glow of my solar-powered landscape lighting. I could see Karen's house from where I sat, dark and silent as it had been for weeks. The for sale sign in her yard now featured a large, price-reduced banner across the top. As I sipped my drink and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I reflected on the strange journey of the past year. What had begun as a simple desire for a quiet suburban life had evolved into a complex drama of theft, deception, and ultimately, justice. I had been tested in ways I never anticipated, forced to stand up for myself when the systems designed to protect me had failed. But I had prevailed. Through careful observation, methodical planning, and the courage to take dramatic action when necessary, I had exposed the truth and reclaimed what was rightfully mine. In the process, I had helped restore balance to a community that had been subtly corrupted by individuals who abused their influence. The lights in my garden glowed softly as darkness fell. My lights, powered by my electricity, under my control. The shadows lengthened across the yard, but they held no secrets now. Everything was illuminated, clear, and honest, just as it should be. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the night, to electricity well-earned and honestly used, to justice served with a bright flash and a siren's wail, to the power of standing up for what is right, even when standing alone. In the end, that is the brightest power of all,